his knowledge of comparative creed between Hanbalis and Ash'aris and Maturidis is, I mean, it's on a level higher than anyone else in Andalus in his time and before. His knowledge of that topic is unbelievable. His knowledge of fiqh is unbelievable. He has an absolutely dazzling way of describing points. His tafsir, his Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an, his tafsir, I remember having that read to us by a sheikh when we were in London. And his style is so similar to Imam Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah. His style is so similar to his. But Imam al-Qurtubi took a very analytical position. So what he would do is he would lay out the ayat. He would say, these are the ayat. And he would talk about the different ways to recite certain ayats that the Prophet ﷺ received. He would talk about they can be recited this way, they may be recited this way, it's permissible. And then he would talk about the language that's within them. And he would say, you must understand the lugha that is within this ayah. And he would break everything down and give you all of the meat that's within that ayah. And then he would start to comment upon it. And he would start to give commentary. And he's quoting books that had to have been sent to him by correspondence or brought by Ibn al-Jawzi or someone, because they're books outside of their sphere. And then he would only quote his imam's position last to show respect that he wasn't so committed as a Maliki that he was actually partisan. So he would quote his imam last. Further to that, his knowledge over certain issues of creed showed that he had a very developed and mature attitude in theology. He was an Ash'ari, but he was able to be mature enough to where he could realize that in certain positions there was a difference in opinion. And he was able to take things that were so voluminous and shrink it down into one sentence. He wrote a book that had to do with fiqh masail called Jami' al-Fiqhiyya, Jami' al-Ahkam al-Fiqhiyya. That book, he stated within its pages, whenever you find an imam for a ruler going into his presence, you are not to pray behind him or show him any allegiance until he gives excuse or ceases from that action. Because he was a stickler about justice. He was a stickler about governance. He was a stickler about who the right people should be. And he witnessed the slow rise of Catholicism in Andalus. He witnessed it. And sometimes you'll see in his writings where he discusses things in some depth about these matters. He wrote a book on dhikr, the virtues of dhikr, at-tadhkirah. Remarkable. Qurtubi, Imam al-Qurtubi is one of, if not the greatest, he's one of the greatest scholars that ever came out of Andalus. One of the greatest. I mean, still today, if you mention his tafsir is called Jami' li Ahkam al-Qur'an. If you just say to someone that knows anything about the deen, that's studied, we're talking 11 years and up, not people that have done the weekend course here, the weekend course there. They have 11 years of studying up seriously. You say, have you read or do you know about Tafsir al-Qurtubi? They'll know straight across. A smile will come on their face. They'll say, Subhanallah, do you have that? And if you say, yes, what are you doing with that? Akhi, astaghfirullah. You haven't studied these things where you should have it. Or if you say, well, no, I've heard of it because it was mentioned. They say, oh, yes, alhamdulillah, this alim, he's this, he's that. And they can tell you, no matter what madhab they're from. He receives such accolades because of his knowledge. You then have Sayfuddin Yahya ibn al-Nasih al-Hanbali, who died 662AH. Shamsuddin Abdullah ibn al-Awza'i, the Hanafi judge and great talent, who died in 673AH. This particular Imam, Shamsuddin al-Awza'i, the Hanafi judge, he was famous for his voluminous knowledge of the Hanafi texts. Because as we know, there's a narration in Samarkand, there's one in Egypt. He was able to join between the texts and give one unified fatwa. He was one of the first ones to do that. Whereas before, ulama who were Hanafi would give their fatwa from where they were from, because the madhab is gigantic. But he was drawing between the different strands and said, okay, the fatwa is this. The fatwa is this position. I've drawn between these 15 books. Here they are. This is your ruling. And he'd be right on the money. So he is one of those people. Another one was As-Sayyidul Jalil Ahmed al-Badawi, who died in 675 AH. This is the famous Imam Ahmed al-Badawi, rahimahullah, who was the great scholar of Ihsan, the knower of Allah. His grave is visited a great deal in Egypt. His grave. Some things that go on there are permitted, that they give him salam and things, but there's some things that go on there that aren't really right. Our job is not to forbid people from visiting graves altogether, but to educate and inform people, listen, you should not be doing these unpraiseworthy activities in front of the Imam. Imam al-Badawi is a great alim. Another was Yahya al-Nawawi. Imam Sharafuddin Yahya al-Nawawi, Abu Zakaria. He died in 676 AH, rahimahullah. He wrote, as I showed, the Arba'in al-Nawawiyah. He was famously known for his knowledge of fiqh. He is the main voice, the mu'tamad, the dependent upon voice in Shafi'i fiqh. So when a Shafi'i will be looking for something, they will be looking in one of his authorized books for the fatwa. There's another book translated of his, which is called Al-Maqasid, which is his slim book on fiqh that he's done. That includes fiqh, some parts of creed as well. Imam Yahya al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, is from the Jamia Umayyah University. He studied there. He also studied and taught and was a rector at the Dar al-Hadith Institute, which requires that the teachers memorize at least 200,000 hadith. So he was no slouch either. He was one of the chief students of Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, rahimahullah, although Imam Nawawi in his Ihsan, his tariqah, was Suhr Wirdi. We mentioned who Imam Suhr Wirdi was. He studied with Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama comparative creed and hadith. Had a deep knowledge of hadith with how much he memorized. So when he went from the Umayyah to taking the chair at the Dar al-Hadith, his knowledge was marvelous. He wrote a commentary called Sharh Sahih Muslim. The commentary on Sahih Muslim, it's 19 volumes, 18 volumes in most printings, with the printing of some Mawludi from Al-Azhar. That is one of the best commentaries I've ever read in my short life on the Sahih of Imam Muslim. One of the best I've ever read in my life. It's in Arabic. But Imam al-Nawawi, his classification of the ahadith, then his quoting of the different positions and the different schools of fiqh in that area, and then his summation. And it makes you realize why he's Shaykh al-Islam. He predeceased his own father. He died before his own father died, at the age of 44. Some historians say that he never married. Some historians say he never married. But he died at 44 and left behind a collection of literature that some scholars that are married have not left behind this level of literature. He wrote constantly. One of his students said that he used to see him writing 40 pages a day. So you can see why he left behind such a contribution to this ummah. Now we go from 679 to 699. 679 came with massive arguments and battles resulting from discussions between Imam Taqi and Ibn Taymiyyah Al-Hanbali and some of the Ash'ari Imams in this area that rejected his statements and resented his teaching style. We must make an introduction of this. The title Ibn Taymiyyah is, many different scholars have had this title. You have Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. He is the big alim, the number 2 voice in the Hanbali school for fatwa. Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. He died 653 AH. Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. There's another Ibn Taymiyyah. He's Fakhruddin Ibn Taymiyyah. And he died 622 AH. There's another Ibn Taymiyyah who's Shihabuddin Ibn Taymiyyah, who died 672 AH. Shihabuddin Ibn Taymiyyah is the son of Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah. And Shihabuddin Ibn Taymiyyah is the father of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, who was born 661AH. The other Ibn Taymiyyahs, many people in English have not heard of them. This one, they have heard of. He is Taqi ibn Taymiyyah from 661 to 728 Hijri. Came from a family of Hanbali theologians. His father was chief judge in Iraq from Baghdad. His grandfather was chief judge in Iraq. His father was the khatib and judge in Harran in Sham, where Taqi was born. Taqi Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah. Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah studied with Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, took tariqah from Shamsuddin ibn Qudama, studied creed, studied fiqh in many different areas. Now, to put him in his proper historical context, Taqi ibn Taymiyyah was at the level of mujtahid murajjih, which means he was a preferential mujtahid. He was able to take fatwa and draw between them. He was held to have memorized 400,000 hadith. So then why is there so much dispute about Taqi Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah? Why is there so much dispute about he's this, he's that, he has tariqah, he's an alim, he's this, he's a mujahid? Why is there all this dispute? It comes down to 11 main masail. 11 main masail that he discussed that he is alone on in his position. One is his positions on the names and attributes of Allah. That's one of the positions that he is isolated. He's alone in this position because some of the statements he went further than any of the ulama before him had gone in some of the statements that he made. Number two, in his collection, this is just 2 volumes of his Majmu' Fatawa. These 2 volumes that you can see on the table are volumes 10 and 11. They deal with tasawwuf. Volume 10 is called Kitab al-Tasawwuf. That's all it deals with. Taking tariqah, bay'ah, all these different things that happen in dhikr. The second one deals with suluk, how a Sufi is supposed to live. There's no dispute about his tasawwuf or his qadiriyah. There's no dispute about that. Because one of his students, Imam ibn al-Hadi, or one of his latter day pupils, Imam ibn al-Hadi, Ibn Abdul Hadi, he wrote the text, Kitab Badi Labs al-Tariqa. He wrote the book called The Book of the Beginning of Taking the Tariqah. And in it, Imam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is mentioned as having taken Khilafah from one of the Qadri Sheikhs. So that's not in dispute. It's in the Princeton Library. If you'd like, you can go and look at manuscript 8082, and it's in the Princeton Library. Now, you have to be able to know how to read manuscripts and palimpsest, but you can read it for yourself. So the second dispute regarding him had to do with what's in volume 10, where he was asked about the prophets. And he made a statement that was tantamount to attributing sin to prophets. It was tantamount. If you looked at this statement, some of the ulama saw it as tantamount to attributing sin to the prophets. Tantamount. The third issue regarding him has to do with the eternality of the fire. Because some of the ulama that examined his writings in his fatwa, they said that some of the writings were tantamount to his saying that the fire might go out. Some of them said this. The next mas'ala that there's an issue with is the issue of shafa'ah with the living that have departed this world. Some state, by looking at his writings, for example, his Qa'ida Jalila fi Tawassuli wal Wasila. This book, where he lays out his understanding that shafa'ah should not be made with those who are living that have departed from this world. It is an act of minor shirk to do so because those people have not asked you to do so. Right? Number 5, setting out to visit the graves. Imam Taymiyyah in this text as well, And another text that has to do with visiting the graves stated that it's haram to set out to visit the graves.